All right, the other group of the Thyreophora, besides the Ankylosauria, are the Stegosauria, which, as it says there, literally means the plated lizards. And another all herbivorous group, another group of just plant eaters, and it includes two things: the family Stegosauridae. And notice this, that anytime I have the taxonomic grouping called the family, it ends in this id, I-D-A-E. So for Ankylosauridae, it was family Ankylosauridae. Here, this is the family Stegosauridae. And then there's one weirdo that they just don't know where to put it, and so it's kind of thrown out there. I'll show you some pictures in just a minute. It's, again, there's some of its relevant characteristics right there. Let's look here. We have, again, the Thyreophora, Ankylosauria, Stegosauria. If we zero in now on the Thyreophora cladogram, we're going to worry about this group here. And like I said, we have this very distinctive family, the Stegosaurids, and then this oddball thing out here. It might be that someday we find enough characteristics, more good bones, that we're able to name a separate family for it, or include it in the Stegosaurids somehow, or break these up somehow. But for now, it's just kind of off here like this. So again, here's some of the characteristics of this Huayangosaurus. Don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. And then just the picture of the thing. And again, it has armor down its back, armor plating, but they are spike-shaped. And then there's a few other additional spine rows here. And then I'll notice as well, it has a very, what we call a tall skull. That would be measuring from the bottom of the jaw up like this. It's very tall and very deep with a short little snout. And that's going to be different from a lot of the other groups. Look at the leg lengths too. So notice the sort of distance below the spinal column for the back legs and the front legs, what we have of them, or what we infer to be finishing this off. And it was something where the forelimbs, the front limbs, were exactly the same length as the hind limbs. Also very different. Again, let's look at an artist's rendition of these things. And again, you see these artists have sort of taken liberties with color and sort of shape and all this. For both of them, more so for this one, notice they've got a stance where the front and hind limb extensions are about the same, so that there's a nice horizontal line of the body to the head to the tail for this group. You can see all the different spines up there. So it's an interesting group, but not there. The family Stegosauridae is the one we know a lot more about, and actually Stegosaurus, that's my favorite dinosaur. I've loved it since I was a kid, and it's part of this family group. And here's the relevant characters for these things. They have low skulls, meaning they don't have huge enlarged fat heads and long snouts, and they have what are called posterior eye sockets. Their eye sockets are placed, well, we'll look at some pictures here. They are behind the cheek teeth row. Now think about this. Your eye sockets are right above your cheek teeth. Think about where your eye is in your head, and then go straight down. You hit basically your cheek teeth. Their eye sockets would have been placed farther back than all of their cheek teeth. It'd be farther back in the head. Another key factor is their rear legs, their hind limbs, are going to be much longer than forelimbs. Remember I said that the ankylosaurs were this way. Well, these are really this way. And again, they have the hooves on the end of the toes, but that one's not distinctive. Of course, we saw some ankylosaurs with that as well. The genus Stegosaurus is our proxy for all of these things. Very important group. We know a lot about them because we have a lot of them in the United States, and we've been collecting them now for over 100 years. they have a prominent row of large armored plates on their back, and then small little plates everywhere else. There's those leaf-shaped teeth again. Remember, that indicates that they are herbivores. They did have a rather long neck and a long tail with, instead of a club on the end of the tail, they have spikes on the end of the tail. So a similar sort of natural selection as the ankylosaurs. You're going to armor yourself up, but they do it differently. And then you're going to put some defensive weaponry at the end of your tail, which they also do differently. So instead of a club tail, they have a spiked tail. Here's an interesting little note. Their forefeet have 5 toes. Their hind feet only have 4 toes. And then just here's the first example where I'm going to talk about this. You'll see a lot of times where, remember, we just have the bones, but we can flesh out the bones, and then you'll see people make estimates. You'll go, well, if something had a leg this long, a femur this long, and a tibia and fibula this long, they'd have a leg this big. I would estimate the musculature on this would weigh this much. Then they would, add it all up, and you'll see a lot of times an estimated tonnage of a particular dinosaur. And here's the first time I'm going to mention it. These stegosaurs, pretty big, about as big as a rather large pickup truck, a rather large SUV, 1 to 2 tons. Again, the difference between the bones we have and an artist's reconstruction of these things. And notice that you can see it quite clearly on the painting and less clearly here. These rows of plates are not arranged in one single row. There's 2 rows. And so there's kind of an overlapping where you have a plate on one side, you have an opening on the other, plate on this side, opening here, back and forth. So they alternate so that collectively they make a solid armored front over the creature here. Here you can see the long face, the short snout, and not a tall head. And then notice there's the eye socket, and the last of their cheek teeth would be right there in front of them in the face. So the action end of the creature, in an evolutionary sense, where does it get its food, is really placed forward. Get that food. Short little limbs, long hind limbs, butt up in the air, face down into the vegetation. This is meant to be a nice eating machine. Again, going back to this plate arrangement, at first when they found these things laying there dead like this, they weren't arranged nicely like so. You'll see a picture in just a second. The thought was, oh, it had one solitary row, sort of like a mohawk that you'd see on a punker. But there's not enough room for them all. And so we've found better skeletons since, and they're now 2 rows. And the thought is that these things might be a way for them to start regulating their body temperature. If you can imagine flesh covering these spines of these creatures, these armored plates, blood flowing through them, if you sort of get them wet and let them wind rush through them, it cools you down. If you need to heat up early in the morning, as a lot of reptiles do, you turn yourself to the sun. These would then act as solar panels, so they'd be good for both cooling and heating. Again, there's a beautiful reconstruction of how the bones would be. Here's sort of an actual picture of how these things are found. And so you get an idea of the complexity of sort of building these things, because you go from this to this and ultimately to what's here in the painting. And don't forget, this here still is this is a 5-star glorious fossil specimen, because it's one specimen, one individual, all articulated. Remember when we were talking about moving bones around, the sad fact is that usually you have piles of bones with 5 bones from this creature, 200 from this one, 1 from this one. 90% of them are broken up. They've been traveled all around. So this is, as bad as this looks, this is still okay. Anyway, gives you some idea of the complexity of figuring out the plate arrangements, and I just kind of leave you with this goofy arrangement here. Unrealistic.